Chapter 1. The Grey Bloom. The Rain Tasted of Ash. It wasn't the familiar bite of mountain snow, but a gritty metallic tang that clung to the tongue and settled like a film on the lungs. It had been falling for 70 days. 70 days of unrelenting gray drizzle that choked the valleys and frosted the peaks of the Dragon's Teeth Mountains. 70 days since the sun, once a vibrant king in the sky, had become a cold, indifferent observer, a black hole of stolen light. I, Kaelin Vorath, Hearthguard of the Jagged-Blade Orcs, tasted it again as I knelt beside the shattered remains of the winter hearth. It wasn't the warmth, the comforting thrum of magic woven into the stones that had been extinguished. It was the color. The hearth, built by generations of my clan, had been crafted from obsidian infused with captured fire, pulsating with a deep ruby red that reflected the embers of 1,000 triumphs. Now it was just gray. The stone was smooth, lifeless, and the scent of burning pine was overlaid with the unsettling odor of decay. The War of the Dying Hue was, in its bleakest form, a slow, agonizing death. We, the Jagged-Blade Orcs, were locked in a perpetual, brutal cycle with the Kingdom of High-Crest and the Void-Walker Elves. Each nation, driven by the dwindling warmth, the desperate need for the remaining sunstones, relentlessly hunted the others. The stones weren't weapons, not directly. They were reservoirs of concentrated heat, fragments of the original sun, radiating a gentle, life-giving warmth. Without them, the land had become a frozen tomb. My hand tightened on the haft of my warhammer, Stormcaller. It was forged from the bones of a frost dragon, imbued with a brutal strength that mirrored the Orcish spirit. Beside me, Torvin, my brother, and a veteran of 100 skirmishes, meticulously examined the charred remains of the hearth's focusing runes. "The Bleached Council, they've corrupted the stone," he grunted, his voice rasping with the cold. "The magic isn't gone, Kaelin, just twisted. It's like trying to hold a flame in a sea of ice." Across the valley, the High-Crest banners, emblazoned with the silver griffin of King Alaric, snapped in the gray wind. Their soldiers, disciplined humans clad in polished steel, were engaged in a grueling, senseless slaughter with our scouting party. They, like us, were driven by the desperate need for the stones. But something was different. The fighting was methodical, almost calculated. It wasn't the chaotic, reckless fury that usually characterized Orc High-Crest engagements. "They're hoarding them, Captain Lyra," a woman of relentless composure and a terrifyingly accurate eye, reported over the static of my Voxcaster. "They've established fortified positions around the Silver Falls. They're not even fighting us. They're simply cutting off our supply lines, securing the last of the stone." The Void-Walker Elves, ever aloof and distant, were less forthcoming. Their movements were shrouded in mist and rumor, whispers of unsettling bargains and forbidden magic. We knew they controlled the peaks of the Silent Spine, the source of the most potent sunstones, but their motives were as opaque as the gray sky. Just then, a rider, a young torchbearer named Silas, arrived, his breath visible in the cold air. He carried a message, delivered by a hawk, that sent a shiver down my spine, colder than the ice clinging to my armor. "The Archbishop's vault, it's been breached," he stammered, his face pale. "The sunstone within is draining." I cursed under my breath, a guttural rumble of fury and despair. The Archbishop, Lord Valerius, had been a figure of unsettling calm, a master manipulator who had managed to forge a fragile alliance between our warring nations, all for the sake of acquiring the stones. Now, it appeared, he was engaging in something far more sinister. "Show me," I ordered, Stormcaller rising in my hand. The vault, located within the crumbling ruins of the Citadel of Silverlight, the ancient capital of High-Crest, was a sight that defied description. The walls were slick with a viscous violet fluid. The air throbbed with a subtle, nauseating hum. And in the center of the chamber, resting on a corrupted altar, pulsed the sunstone. It wasn't radiating warmth, it was absorbing it. The radiant ruby red had been replaced by a sickly, draining violet, and the very air around it seemed to shimmer with an unnatural chill. It wasn't just the stone that was corrupted. The entire vault was coated in a fine gray dust, a residue of something ancient and terrible. And then I saw a faint spectral image shimmering just behind the stone, the outline of a man, his face a mask of frozen ecstasy, holding a glowing staff that channeled the draining energy. Lord Valerius, bathed in the violet light, a puppet of something far older and more terrifying than any mortal. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. The war wasn't for the stones. It was for him. Chapter 2. The Violet Stain. The silence in the vault was heavier than the oppressive, color-drained air. My hand tightened around Stormcaller, the runes etched into its polished obsidian surface, thrumming with a nascent, defiant energy. "Secure the perimeter," I barked, my voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate with the violet hum. "Every guard, every sentinel. We don't know what else this place holds, what echoes of this corruption remain." Kalen, my hearthguard, a mountain of a man sculpted from granite and muscle, was already barking orders to the remaining members of our contingent. He was a practical warrior, forged in the brutal hearthfires of the Jagged-Blade Orcs, a man who trusted action above all else. "Done, Torin," he grunted, his hand instinctively resting on the haft of his warhammer. "Just keep those damn shadows at bay. This place feels wrong." Wrong was an understatement. The entire experience felt like a violation, a deep, psychic wound inflicted upon the very fabric of reality. The Archbishop's deception was a poison spreading through the heart of our kingdoms, but this was something far more primal, far more unsettling. As we moved deeper into the vault, we encountered more of the violet stain. It wasn't simply a discoloration, it was a palpable absence, a void where color and warmth should have been. The gray dust thickened, coating everything in a fine, chilling film. The air grew noticeably colder, biting at exposed skin, despite the desperate heat emanating from Stormcaller. We found remnants of what had once been a grand hall, shattered pillars carved with archaic symbols, furniture turned to dust, and bizarre, pulsating formations of the violet fluid clinging to the walls like malignant blossom. "The elves say the light of the stones is woven with the memories of creation," murmured Lyra, our prism mage, her face pale in the unnatural light. She carefully collected a sample of the violet fluid in a phial crafted from iridescent quartz. This is the antithesis. It's not just draining the light, it's draining the memory of it." Her voice held a tremor of unease, a recognition of something profoundly dangerous. Suddenly, a low, grating voice echoed through the vault, seemingly emanating from everywhere and nowhere. "Intriguing. So, the little torchbearer finally descends into the heart of the serpent." We spun around, Stormcaller raised, and Lyra's hands already weaving intricate patterns of protective energy. Standing before us, partially obscured by the violet haze, was Theron, the Elven Star-Seer. He was a figure sculpted from moonlight and sorrow, his silver hair cascading down his shoulders, his eyes deep pools of ancient knowledge and unsettling calm. He hadn't moved, but his presence felt acutely, terrifyingly there. "Theron," I said, keeping Stormcaller trained on him, "what are you doing here?" He smiled, a slow, chilling curve of his lips. "Observing, of course. Facilitating. The council is efficient in its pursuit of oblivion, but it needs a little nudge. Wouldn't you agree?" He gestured towards the pulsing sunstone with a slender, impossibly long hand. "This isn't merely a vessel for warmth, Torin. It's a conduit. A key. And Valerius, bless his ambitious soul, is unlocking it with frightening precision." "You've been feeding Nyxos," Lyra stated, her voice tight with controlled fury. "You've knowingly allowed this devastation." "Devastation is inevitable, little prism," Theron replied, his voice laced with disdain. The world was always destined to fade. The Sunstones were merely accelerating the process. And what's more, it was liberating. Humanity, orcs, elves caught in cycles of violence and obsession. This bleeding of the world offers a welcome release. You've become a puppet for a cosmic leech, I snarled, channeling more power into Stormcaller. The runes flared with a brighter, more intense blue light, pushing back against the violet haze. We're not going to stand by and watch the world and our people be consumed. Sentimentality, Theron scoffed, a ripple of violet energy flowing from his hand and coalescing around him. A weakness. You are fighting a current far stronger than yourselves. You seek to reclaim the light, but the light is already gone. The question is, what will you do with the ashes? As he spoke, the spectral image behind the Sunstone solidified, becoming clearer, more substantial. It was Valerius, his face frozen in an expression of serene horror, the glowing staff still clutched in his hand, feeding the violet corruption. A wave of nausea washed over me, a primal understanding of the horror unfolding before us. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a desecration of something profoundly sacred. We're ending your reign, Valerius, I declared, my voice resonating with the raw fury of a man fighting for everything he held dear. The coup of the living flame begins now. Chapter 3. The coup of the living flame, the air in the grand citadel of Veritas, once a beacon of human faith, now felt like a stagnant grave. The violet haze clung to everything, a sickly velvet that muffled sound and distorted vision. Valerius' vault, normally a cathedral of polished granite and sacred glyphs, was a swirling vortex of purple light, the stolen sunstone at its heart pulsating with an unnerving rhythm. It wasn't a comfortable sight, but it was a crucial one. We had to act, and acting meant disrupting the carefully constructed illusion of control the Bleached Council had maintained for so long. My name is Kalen Stormcaller, a torchbearer of High-Crest, and for the last few weeks, I felt the icy tendrils of this corruption not just in my bones, but in my very spirit. The righteous fire that usually burned within me, fueled by the unwavering belief in our duty, had been quenched, replaced by a desperate urgency. Beside me stood Lyra, a Hearthguard of the Jagged-Blade Orcs, a warrior more comfortable amongst the rumble of forges and the scent of burning iron than polite conversation, and Silas, a prism mage of the Void-Walker Elves, his movements precise and deliberate as he adjusted the lenses of his protective goggles. "The readings are confirming it," Silas murmured, his voice hushed. "The violet energy isn't just draining the sunstone, it's actively rewriting the ley lines beneath the citadel. Valerius is building a conduit, a channel directly into Nyxos domain." Lyra, a towering figure forged from muscle and grim determination, hefted her hammer, its head inlaid with shimmering obsidian. "Let's not theorize. The Archbishop is practically bathing in stolen light. Let's cut off his supply." The plan, meticulously crafted after days of furtive reconnaissance and desperate consultations, was audacious, bordering on suicide. We went aiming for a head-on confrontation that would be suicide. We aimed for a surgical strike, a coordinated disruption that would shatter the Bleached Council's foundations. We moved swiftly, using the Citadel's labyrinthine corridors to our advantage. Kalen, attuned to the flow of righteous energy, led the way, guiding us through shadowed passages, his fingers tracing the barely there shimmer of protective wards. Lyra, with her brutal efficiency, cleared pathways with a focused series of blows, her hammer echoing through the silent halls, and Silas monitored the energy fluctuations, a silent guardian against unforeseen surges. We reached Valerius' vault just as the Archbishop began to chant, his voice a strained, unsettling drone that resonated with the violet light. He stood before the pulsing sunstone, his eyes glazed over, his face a mask of serene, unnerving bliss. His elaborate robes, once rich crimson, were now stained a bruised violet, and the holy banner of High-Crest, normally a symbol of unwavering faith, hung limp and dark beside him. Stop him! I roared, channeling Stormcaller. The runes carved into my gauntlets flared with a brilliant cerulean light, pushing back against the encroaching violet. The air crackled with energy, and a column of blue force slammed into the Archbishop, momentarily disrupting his chant and staggering him backwards. But it wasn't enough. The violet haze intensified, and Valerius continued, his voice gaining a chilling confidence. "The light returns," he intoned, "but it will be our light. A light tempered by understanding, by acceptance of the inevitable that's when Lyra moved." With a guttural cry she charged, swinging her obsidian hammer with devastating force. The impact resonated through the vault, shattering the intricately carved stone totems that lined the wall, symbols of the Blood-Shaman's devotion to the earth's primal energies. The raw friction of the hammer against the stone sparked, not with a destructive flame, but with a focused heat, a searing intensity that seemed to penetrate the violet haze. Valerius recoiled, clutching at his chest, his serene expression twisting into one of agonized confusion. The violet glow around him flickered and dimmed. Silas, meanwhile, was dismantling the Star-Seer's instruments. He didn't simply destroy them, he meticulously redirected the leaking light, the residual echoes of the Sunstone's essence, into a series of prismatic lenses crafted from pure quartz. He focused the chaotic energy into a single, intensely concentrated beam, a laser of blinding clarity that sliced through the violet haze, striking the Star-Seer's telescope. The instrument, a towering marvel of elven craftsmanship, exploded in a shower of shards, the redirected light focusing into a searing white arc. The last piece of the puzzle was the Archbishop. As his confusion deepened, a sense of dread washed over him. His eyes were no longer vacant, they were filled with a terrifying clarity, a glimpse into the abyss. He was seeing things not the world as it was, but as Nyxos intended it to be, a world bleached of all color, all warmth, all hope. I raised my hands and Stormcaller reached its zenith. A pillar of pure, righteous fire erupted from my palms, bathing the room in a blinding white light. The holy banner, resurrected by the intensity of the flame, engulfed the Archbishop, its crimson dyes absorbing the violet taint. The Archbishop screamed, a sound of pure, agonizing disbelief, as his own dark sight was consumed by the burning light. The coup of the living flame had begun. Chapter 4, Echoes in Obsidian. The air in the grand repository of the Bleached Council still shimmered with the ghost of violet. It wasn't a palpable haze, not like the creeping frost that plagued the valley, but a residual echo, a lingering stain on the very fabric of reality. The scent of ozone and burnt cedarwood, the products of Silas' meticulous work, mingled with the lingering, sickly sweetness of corrupted magic. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of condensation from the shattered remains of the Star-Seer's telescope. It was a silence pregnant with the awful realization that their desperate gambit had succeeded, but at a cost. The violet glow, once a conduit for Nyxos' hunger, was now a faint pulsating bruise on the floor, slowly fading. The energy it's receding, Silas murmured, meticulously adjusting a quartz lens within his hand. His face, usually etched with a grim intensity, held a flicker of something akin to relief. Nyxos wasn't anticipating a coordinated assault. He believed us consumed by our petty squabbles, feeding his endless appetite. Across the vast chamber, Kalen, the Hearthguard, carefully surveyed the pulverized remains of the Blood-Shaman's obsidian totems. The air thrummed with a low, grating vibration, a vestige of the corrupted heat that had been unleashed. The shaman's heart was always a brittle thing, bound by rituals and corrupted by ambition, he rumbled, his voice a deep baritone. But to reduce it to ash, it felt wasteful. A fire should cleanse, not simply extinguish. I, Valerius, the torch-bearer, stood before the colossal pile of sunstones, no longer glowing violet, but radiating a muted, expectant warmth. They pulsed with the memory of the sun, a silent testament to the world that had been stolen. The initial shock of the coup was wearing off, replaced by a cautious optimism. "The pyre of nations begins now," I announced, my voice resonating with a newfound strength. "Not with conquest, but with surrender. We offer the last vestiges of our world's heart, not as weapons, but as a catalyst." Suddenly, a tremor ran through the repository, a low, guttural groan emanating from the depths of the earth. Dust cascaded from the crumbling ceiling, and the violet stain on the floor intensified, swirling like a miniature storm. "His reacting," Silas shouted, his hands already manipulating the quartz lenses, intensifying the prismatic beam. "The raw, unrefined power, it's too much for him. We've severed his main conduit, but he's trying to coalesce, to reassert control." The violet stain coalesced, taking on a sickly, swirling form, a nascent cloud of shadow, thick with the stench of decay and the absence of light. Tendrils of it snaked across the floor, seeking purchase, testing the boundaries of our containment. It wasn't the colossal, recognizable entity we'd glimpsed in the valley. This was something smaller, more insidious, a localized manifestation of Nyxos' will, fueled by the sheer force of our combined action. "It's feeding on the sunstones," Kalen roared, charging forward with his hammer, striking the violet tendrils with a resounding clang. "He doesn't need to consume entire stones, he thrives on their decay." I focused my will, channeling the remaining holy energy within my body. The torch in my hand blazed with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm me, and I directed the flame towards the swirling vortex. It was a desperate act, a last line of defense against a force that sought to unravel reality itself. The fire didn't burn the violet cloud, it disrupted it, scattering its shadow essence into a million shimmering fragments. "The focus! It's about the focus!" Silas yelled, frantically adjusting the lenses. "We need a single concentrated point, a focal nexus for the energy of the sunstones. Not a scattered beam, but a single, overwhelming wave." He paused, his eyes narrowed in concentration, as an idea struck him. "The Archbishop's banner!" He gestured towards the crimson-stained cloth, now crumpled on the floor. "The holy dyes, they were designed to absorb corruption. We can amplify it, channel it, and obliterate him." Without hesitation, he ripped a section of the banner, twisting and shaping it with practiced hands. He wove it into a complex geometric pattern, creating a makeshift resonator, a crystalline amplifier for the banner's holy energy. Then he thrust the banner towards the violet cloud, and with a shout, unleashed a wave of pure, searing crimson. The effect was immediate. The violet cloud convulsed, shrieking in a silent, agonizing burst. The fragments of shadow dissipated, and the violet stain on the floor vanished entirely. But as the crimson wave subsided, a new distortion emerged, a shimmering ripple in the air, growing in size, threatening to swallow everything. Nyxos wasn't defeated, not entirely. He was adapting, evolving. We had merely shifted the battleground, focused the attack. The realization dawned on us with chilling clarity. We were fighting not a singular monster, but a process, a hungry void, capable of absorbing and corrupting anything. The coup of the living flame was not an end, but a terrifying beginning. The true battle, we suspected, was not for the sunstones, but for the very soul of the world. Chapter 5. Echoes of the Void. The silence after the crimson wave was heavier than the perpetual frost that gripped the last valley. It wasn't the silence of battle, but the pregnant stillness before a storm, a silence filled with the unsettling hum of nascent power, the palpable thrum of something consuming. The shimmer, the ripple in the air, had grown from a disturbing distortion to a yawning vortex, swirling with the same sickly violet light that had corrupted the sunstones, and, now, the very ground beneath our feet. It's feeding, Rhys murmured, his torchbearer's blade held aloft, the crimson glow reflecting in his wide, haunted eyes. The wave weakened it, yes, but it's using our efforts, our attempts to destroy it, as sustenance. Kalen, the Hearthguard, grunted, his face slick with sweat despite the chilling air. The Blood-Shaman wasn't wrong about the amplification. The banner's inherent properties were potent, but we didn't fully grasp the nature of the corruption. Nyxos isn't just draining the stones, he's draining us, feeding on our desires, our fears, our very will to fight. He gestured to the crimson banner, now a charred husk, radiating a faint, unsettling warmth. We've inadvertently created a beacon, a feast for the void. Across the ravaged courtyard, Lyra, the prism mage, was already meticulously studying the vortex. Her silver eyes, usually alight with ethereal curiosity, were narrowed with grim determination. The distortion, it's not just absorbing light, it's distorting time. In detecting echoes, fragments of moments trapped within the vortex. Moments of intense emotion, betrayal, grief, fury amplified and solidified. It's layering itself with our history, our regrets. So, we're battling not just an entity, but a monument to misery? Elara, the High-Crest strategist, asked, her voice tight with urgency. She was surveying the scene with a calculating gaze, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her ancestral spear. Damn that council. They weren't just betrayers, they were architects of despair. Suddenly, a guttural shriek echoed from within the vortex, a sound that wasn't simply painful, but fundamentally wrong, like a musical note played backwards. The vortex expanded, pushing against the stone walls of the courtyard, the violet light intensifying, bathing everything in an unholy luminescence. Within the swirling chaos, shapes began to coalesce, fragmented memories, twisted faces, glimpses of the Archbishop's corrupted sermons, the Blood-Shaman's chilling rituals, the Star-Seer's obsessive calculation. It was a horrifying collage of the last valley's history, rendered in agonizing detail. It's attempting to rewrite us, Lyra shouted, struggling to maintain her focus. It's trying to force us to relive our worst moments, to be consumed by them. She raised her hands, channeling the remaining energy from a shattered prism, projecting a wave of pure white light towards the vortex. It met with a jarring resistance, the violet light instantly neutralizing it, leaving behind only a shimmering residue. It's learning. Kalen roared, charging forward with his warhammer, fueled by a desperate surge of adrenaline. He slammed the hammer against the edge of the vortex, sending a shockwave that momentarily disrupted the swirling chaos. But the effect was fleeting. The vortex responded with a pulse of violet energy, slamming into Kalen with brutal force, sending him sprawling across the ground, his armor cracked, his breath ragged. Rhys, seeing his comrade fall, acted instinctively. Remembering the chaotic resonance of the crimson wave, he began to channel his own innate fire, not as a weapon, but as a force of purification. He visualized the heart of the darkness, the nexus of Nyxos influence, and poured his burning resolve into a focused stream of pure righteous flame. The flame didn't burn the vortex, it shattered it. Not with destructive force, but with an agonizing wave of pure, unfiltered truth. The fragmented memories within the vortex dissolved, the distorted faces vanished, and the echoing shrieks faded into a low, guttural moan. But as the last vestiges of the vortex dissipated, something new emerged, a single pulsating shard of violet crystal, radiating an unsettling warmth. It floated suspended in the air, perfectly formed, an echo of the corrupted sunstone. And around it, a new voice, cold and devoid of emotion, spoke. You thought you understood. You thought you were fighting a monster. But you were merely delaying the inevitable. The void seeks not to destroy, but to complete. To absorb the last vestiges of color and warmth. To create a perfect, silent, colorless existence. And you, my dear children, will be the final brushstrokes. The shard drifted towards Alara, hovering inches from her face. The violet light intensified, drawing her in, promising an eternity of perfect knowledge. "Don't look at it, Alara!" Rhys screamed, lunging forward and batting the shard away with his blade, sending it spinning across the courtyard. The battle had shifted again. This wasn't a contest of brute force. It was a war of perception, of will, and the stakes were no longer just the survival of their nations, but the very essence of their souls. Chapter 6. The Echo in the Void, the courtyard of the Obsidian Citadel, once a staging ground for brutal conflict, was now a tableau of exhausted warriors, a symphony of ragged breaths, and the metallic tang of blood. The violet shard, having spun wildly, had lodged itself precariously atop the highest spire of the citadel, a malevolent jewel, pulsing with an unsettling internalized light. The air around it shimmered, not with heat, but with a disorienting distortion, as if reality itself was struggling to maintain its form. Alara, her face pale and slick with sweat, remained rooted to the spot, her hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of her prism mage blade. Rhys, his arm stinging from the deflected blow, circled her warily, his eyes narrowed in a perpetual assessment of danger. The Orcish Hearthguard, Borin Stonefist, a mountain of muscle and scarred steel, stood vigilant, his hammer held aloft, ready to smash the shard into oblivion. Even the seasoned human torchbearers, led by the stoic commander Kalen, maintained a tense, watchful perimeter. "It's watching us," Alara finally whispered, her voice strained. "I can feel it. Like a reflection of our deepest fears, our most guarded desires." Rhys, a pragmatic warrior through and through, grunted. "It's an echo, Alara. A residue of the vortex corruption. A piece of Nyxos' plan. Don't let it prey on your senses." He drew his blade, the steel glinting in the fractured light, and began a slow, methodical sweep around the spire, searching for any sign of the entity's influence. The violet shard continued to pulse, the internal light intensifying with each passing moment. It wasn't simply radiating warmth. It was extracting color, subtly draining the hues from the stone beneath it, leaving behind a dull gray imitation. Kalen, ever the strategist, observed. "It's not just affecting the environment," he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "The arch-shaman's wards are failing. The protective runes are flickering, blanketing themselves in violet. That was the crux of the problem. The Bleached Council hadn't merely been draining the sunstones, they had been subtly destabilizing the ancient magic woven into the very fabric of the land. This shard, it seemed, was amplifying that corruption, feeding on the echoes of the war and the desperate attempts to contain it. Suddenly, Borin roared, smashing his hammer against the base of the spire. The impact sent tremors through the stone, but the shard remained unmoved, its violet light now brighter, more vibrant. Then something shifted. A low, rhythmic hum began to emanate from the shard, resonating deep within Alara's bones. Images flooded her mind, not her own memories, but glimpses of vast, desolate landscapes bathed in perpetual twilight, of beings of pure shadow, and of a chilling, infinite emptiness. "It's showing me the void," she gasped, clutching her head. "Nyxos he doesn't just want to consume, he wants to become. Has weaving himself into the very concept of nothingness." Rhys, sensing the gravity of the situation, moved to shield Alara, his blade a defensive wall against the onslaught of visions. "We need to disrupt the flow. The shard is channeling his power. We need to sever the connection." He glanced at Kalen. "Commander, prepare the resonance blades. Well, attempt to shatter it with focused sonic vibrations." Kalen, a master of arcane manipulation, immediately set to work, summoning the resonance blades, weapons forged from solidified sound, capable of generating intense vibrations. As the blades hummed to life, emitting a high-pitched whine that made their teeth ache, Rhys began to chant an ancient elven counterspell, a weaving of melodic frequencies designed to disrupt Nyxos' influence. But the shard reacted. The violet light flared, and the rhythmic hum intensified, twisting Rhys' chant into a discordant, agonizing shriek. Suddenly, a tendril of violet energy lashed out from the shard, striking Rhys across the chest. He staggered back, clutching at the point of impact, a searing cold spreading through his veins. "It's learning," Alara cried, her eyes widening in horror. "It's adapting to our defenses. It's not just a reflection, it's actively fighting us." The shard pulsed again, and this time not a vision, but a voice, cold and utterly devoid of emotion, filled the courtyard. It didn't speak in words, but in concepts, in raw, unfiltered understanding. It dissected their fears, exposed their ambitions, and laid bare the core of their souls, revealing the vulnerabilities that had allowed Nyxos to manipulate them in the first place. "You seek to restore light," the voice resonated. "But light requires definition, structure. Chaos is beautiful. I offer you serenity. I offer you completion." The violet shard shifted, levitating closer to Alara, an irresistible beacon of unsettling allure. Rhys, weakened but resolute, lunged once more, but this time he wasn't aiming to deflect. He was aiming to contain. With a desperate cry, he channeled the last of his remaining energy into a focused beam of prismatic light, aiming not to destroy the shard, but to isolate it, to contain the encroaching darkness within its violet heart. The light struck the shard, and for a heartbeat there was a blinding flash. When the light subsided, the shard was gone. Only silence remained, and a lingering, unsettling feeling of emptiness. Chapter 7. The Echo of Stillness, the courtyard of the Obsidian Citadel, once a nexus of desperate strategy and simmering animosity, now lay draped in an unnerving stillness. The air, once thick with the stench of sweat, burnt steel, and ancient magic, was strangely clean, almost sterile. Rhys, leaning heavily against the shattered remains of the Star-Seer's observatory, felt the last tendrils of the cold receding, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion that threatened to consume. Alara, still visibly shaken, meticulously examined the smooth, unblemished stone where the violet shard had hovered, a faint shimmer the only evidence of its terrifying presence. "It's gone," she stated, her voice a low murmur, completely vanished. Not destroyed, not absorbed, simply gone. Rhys nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. The voice, it was right. It dissected us. It knew exactly what we were afraid of, what we craved. It didn't want to obliterate the darkness, it wanted to become it. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant melancholic cries of the wind whistling through the fractured telescopes. The initial adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a chilling realization they hadn't defeated Nyxos. They had merely stilled him. The void he represented hadn't been eradicated, merely contained within the echo of their containment. Suddenly, Master Kalen, the veteran Hearthguard, entered the courtyard, his face grim. "I've been speaking with the geomancers," he announced, his voice heavy. "The tremors, they're not ceasing. They're localized, focused around the Sunstone Vaults. And they're intensifying." He gestured towards a holographic projection, shimmering in the air, displaying a network of pulsing red lines, radiating outwards from the ruined Heart Citadel, the seat of the Human Council, and the Jagged-Blade Orcish stronghold. The stones aren't simply drained. They're resonating. Each pulse is feeding Nyxos' awareness, amplifying his influence. "So, he's still learning," Alara murmured, her fingers tracing the outline of a cracked obsidian pillar. "As not just a passive leech. As an intelligence, a predatory one." A deep, guttural rumble echoed through the courtyard, startling them. From the rubble of the Blood-Shaman's temple, a small, wiry figure emerged, Buruk Stonehand, the Hearthguard's youngest recruit, clutching a fractured obsidian hammer. His face was streaked with soot and a disturbing calmness. "I've been studying the residual heat signatures," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "The shaman's totems, they weren't destroyed. They were muted, as if the heat was being drawn into a singular point." He pointed towards the distant, snow-capped peaks of the last valley, the heart of the Bleached Council. "It's throbbing." This revelation sent a fresh wave of dread through the trio. The Bleached Council wasn't merely a collection of corrupted leaders, it was now a nexus, a conduit for Nyxos' growing power. Rhys, ever the strategist, immediately began to formulate a plan. "We need to understand what he's doing with the stones. Kalen, you and your geomancers need to map the precise pathways of the tremors. Ilara, I want you to continue studying the residual energies, find a pattern, a rhythm to his influence. Buruk, you remain here, monitoring the temple. We need to know exactly when the pulses occur, how intense they are. And we need to find a way to break this connection," Ilara added, her gaze fixed on the distant, darkening valley. "Simply containing him isn't a solution. We need to sever the flow to starve him." As they debated, a subtle shift occurred in the air. The unsettling stillness grew, replaced by a feeling of profound emptiness, a sense of things lost, of potential unrealized. Then, Rhys felt it again, a whisper, faint yet distinct, resonating directly within his mind. "You strive to understand," the voice echoed, now not a chilling dissection, but a gentle invitation. "But understanding requires a willingness to embrace the void, to recognize the exquisite beauty of nothingness." He realized with a horrifying certainty that Nyxos wasn't just manipulating them, he was trying to convert them. He wasn't offering serenity, he was offering oblivion. The cube, a living flame, had merely bought them time, a fragile window into which Nyxos could slowly, inexorably bleed their wills dry. The true battle, Rhys knew, had only just begun, a battle not of armies and magic, but of minds, of souls, against the ultimate, silent predator. Chapter 8. The Echo of Emptiness. The silence following the coup of the living flame felt heavier than the frozen air itself. The pyre had burned bright, a defiant scream against the monochrome world, but the immediate aftermath was one of unsettling calm. The tremors, once a frantic, almost frantic pulse of dark energy, had ceased entirely. Rhys, still reeling from the intrusive whisper, felt a leaden weight settle upon his mind, a dampening of thought, a frustrating lack of clarity. "It's gone," Buruk stated, his voice a gravelly rasp. He stood rigidly before the shattered remains of the temple's central altar, a smear of obsidian dust clinging to his weathered face. "The pulses. They've stopped. Completely." Ilara, ever the meticulous observer, was meticulously examining the scorched earth around the pyre. She ran a gloved hand through the ash, collecting samples, her face a mask of focused intensity. "That's not entirely true," she countered, her voice tight. "The residual energies remain. They're muted, like a struck gong, vibrating with a fading echo. Nyxos hasn't simply vanished, has suspended." "What?" Kalen, the youngest of the geomancers, was meticulously charting the ley lines surrounding the last valley, his fingers tracing patterns on a treated hut. "The tremors weren't just energy pulses," he explained, his brow furrowed. "They were paths. Nyxos wasn't just draining the sunstones, he was actively shaping the very fabric of the land around them, building conduits for his influence. Now that they're gone, the pathways are still open, Bhutan form." Rhys, pushing against the nascent lethargy, focused on the unsettling sensation that clung to him. It wasn't pain, not exactly, but a profound sense of loss, not of something he'd possessed, but of something he'd never known. He understood now Nyxos wasn't just trying to steal their will, he was dismantling their memories, their hopes, their very understanding of what it meant to be a human. "The whisper," Rhys began, his voice strained. "It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, a promise of release. We need to analyze the impact of his influence on the geomancers," Alara insisted, her voice sharper now. "Kalen, increase the sensitivity of your detection field. Look for traces of altered ley lines, fractured connections. We need to understand how he was rewriting reality." Kalen nodded, adjusting the intricate network of quartz crystals surrounding him. "Already begun. The readings are disorienting. It's like trying to perceive a melody that's constantly shifting its notes." Baruch, despite his stoicism, shifted uneasily. "The temple feels shallow," he murmured, "as if something essential has been removed. I've spent a lifetime studying this place, but now it's as if it's never been a temple at all." Suddenly, the air shimmered, not with the violent distortion of Nyxos influence, but with a subtle iridescent ripple, like heat rising from pavement. The whispers returned, fainter this time, woven into a chorus of seductive voices. "Embrace the stillness," they murmured. "Let go of your striving. There is beauty in emptiness. You are becoming more than you were." Rhys instinctively raised his hand, shielding his mind. "He's targeting our doubts," he realized, his voice a desperate plea. "Our insecurities. He knows we're afraid of oblivion. He's feeding on that fear." Alara, recognizing the shift in the tide, shouted, "The echoes! They're intensifying. He's building a new pathway, focusing on our past regrets." Kalen's crystals pulsed violently, showering the ground with sparks. The ley lines there not just conduits for his influence, they're a mirror. As reflecting our deepest failures, amplifying them. It's a feedback loop. A wave of nausea washed over Rhys, followed by a flood of images: his childhood regrets, the loss of his parents, the failures of his youthful ambitions. Each image was magnified, twisted, rendered unbearably painful. He staggered, clutching his head, fighting against the onslaught. "He wants us to drown in our sorrows," he gasped, struggling to maintain his focus. "We can't fight him with force. We have to fight him with acceptance. With the knowledge that these regrets are a part of us, that they don't define us." Alara, drawing upon her knowledge of ancient rituals, began chanting in the lost tongue of the Void-Walkers, weaving a counterweave designed to disrupt Nyxos' mirror. Baruch, with surprising agility, began to reinforce the temple's foundations, channeling a meager flow of protective energy. But Rhys realized with a chilling clarity that this wasn't just a battle against Nyxos. It was a battle for the very nature of existence. To defeat him, they had to prove that even in the face of utter oblivion, the desire to be, to create, to experience, to hope was a force more powerful than any cosmic leech. The echo of emptiness was a reminder they were not fighting for a world, but for the possibility of one. Chapter 9. The Weight of Echoes. The chanting of Alara, rhythmic and ancient, began to resonate with the crumbling stone of the Temple of the Silent Star. It wasn't a soothing balm, but a grinding, insistent force, a sonic probe, delving into the deepest recesses of their minds. Rhys felt the counterweave struggling, a flickering shield against the torrential flow of regret, but it was losing ground. The images weren't fading, they were layering, coalescing into a horrifying panorama of every sorrow had ever known, every mistake, every missed opportunity, magnified to the scale of a dying universe. "It's evolving," Kalen shouted, his crystals spitting a furious shower of azure sparks. "He's not just reflecting our regrets, he's actively constructing them. He's weaving nightmares from our vulnerabilities." He gestured wildly at the swirling vortex of violet light emanating from the temple's heart, a physical manifestation of Nyxos' growing dominance. The ley lines aren't simply conduits, they're amplifiers feeding off the despair. Baruch, sweat plastering his thick braided beard to his face, grunted with exertion. The temple, already on the verge of collapse, shuddered under the strain of his channeling. "This Stonite remembers," he rasped. "It remembers a time before the Bleached Council, a time when the stars sang with true light. It's fighting, but it's a weary battle." Rhys, his face pale and streaked with sweat, continued his chant, pushing against the tide of Nyxos influence. "Acceptance is not passive. It's not resignation. It's the acknowledgement that even in ruin, potential remains. We are not defined by what we have lost, but by the choices we make in the face of that loss." He focused, not on the overwhelming grief, but on a single tiny ember of defiance, the memory of his father teaching him to carve bone, the skill now utterly useless, yet a testament to his father's love and his own dedication. Suddenly, the violet light intensified, shifting from a hazy sheen to a blinding white. The air crackled with a new, sharper energy. The echoes of their regrets surged, no longer individual images, but a chorus of accusatory voices, whispering judgments, accusations of cowardice, failure. "You could have saved him," a voice hissed, undeniably his mother's, laced with the pain of his brother's death. "You are a disgrace to your lineage," another voice thundered, a composite of his father's disappointment and the scorn of his clan. Rhys felt his control slipping. He stumbled, nearly collapsing, his vision blurring. The weight of the voices, amplified 1,000-fold, threatened to crush him, to drown him in an ocean of self-loathing. "No!" Elara screamed, interrupting the chorus with a surge of raw energy. She unleashed a wave of shimmering silver light, disrupting the echoes momentarily. "He's feeding on our doubt. We need to break the connection, not fight it." Kalen, understanding dawning in his eyes, began manipulating his crystals with frantic precision. The ley lines, they're not just pathways for Nyxos influence, they're sympathetic resonances. "He's tapping into our emotional vulnerabilities. We need to introduce a counter-resonance, a positive one." He began to channel his own memories, not of regret, but of joy, the warmth of a shared laugh, the satisfaction of a difficult task completed, the profound beauty of a sunset witnessed with his companions. The crystals pulsed with a warm, golden light, and a wave of tranquility washed over the temple. But it wasn't enough. Nyxos, enraged by the disruption, retaliated with a searing blast of violet energy that slammed into Rhys, forcing him back against a crumbling pillar. The pillar splintered, showering him with dust, and for a horrifying moment he lost all sensation, all thought, all feeling. Then he saw it. Not the bleak, suffocating despair of Nyxos influence, but a flicker understanding. Nyxos wasn't simply draining their life force, he was trying to understand them, to dissect their emotions, to analyze their motivations, to comprehend the very essence of their being. "He's not just feeding on our darkness," Rhys realized, his voice a strained whisper. "He's searching for something lost, something he desires, a spark of genuine feeling, a moment of selfless connection." Baruch, drawing upon a reserve of strength he didn't know he possessed, let out a guttural roar and unleashed a torrent of concentrated heat from his hands. The heat didn't directly attack Nyxos, but rather it washed over the temple, strengthening the stone, solidifying its protective defenses. "We fight not against despair," he shouted, "but against the hunger of despair." As the combined efforts of the three heroes reached a critical juncture, Rhys, exhausted but resolute, finally understood. Nyxos wasn't an enemy to be vanquished, but a wound to be healed. Their fight wasn't for a world, but for a single, broken heart, the heart of a cosmic leech desperately yearning for connection. And he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that the key wasn't to destroy him, but to offer him a memory. Chapter 10. Echoes of a Forgotten Bloom. The air, in the shattered remains of the obsidian temple, thrummed with an unnerving stillness. Dust motes, each a miniature shard of lost color, danced in the newly established shafts of sunlight, a light so potent, so shockingly vibrant. It felt like a physical assault after decades of muted gray. The scent of ozone mingled with the acrid tang of burned obsidian, a strangely beautiful perfume of destruction and nascent hope. Rhys, his face smeared with ash and exhaustion, leaned heavily against a newly reinforced section of the pillar, Baruch's fiery heat having subtly altered the stone's molecular structure, rendering it almost impervious to further damage. Elara, her silver eyes shimmering with residual prismatic energy, meticulously scanned the area, her hands weaving delicate patterns of light that seemed to coax the remaining color back into the ravaged walls. "It's quiet," she said, her voice unusually subdued. "The echo of his agony is fading. He doesn't scream him anymore." The remnants of Nyxos. A swirling iridescent cloud, the size of a small dragon, still clung to the temple's core, fragmented and weakened. It wasn't the monstrous entity they'd anticipated. It resembled more a colossal, weeping bloom, petals of shifting violet and bruised indigo constantly unfurling and retracting, as if desperately seeking something it couldn't name. "Heskelmer," Baruch rumbled, flexing his massive arms. "But still hungry. The air it feels thinner where he was." It was Rhys who spoke the words that truly shifted the dynamic. He wasn't resisting us. He was waiting. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Rhys, the torchbearer, the one who'd initially approached the creature with righteous fury, now felt a profound sense of pity. Had spent the last cycle wrestling with the truth, had glimpsed in that horrifying moment the desperate yearning behind the draining tendrils. Nyxos hadn't wanted to consume their despair, had wanted to understand it. "We brought the memory," Elara stated, stepping forward. She held aloft a small, polished shard of quartz, salvaged from one of the shattered Star-Seer's telescopes. It pulsed with a faint internalized light, the last vestige of the prismatic beam. A concentrated distillation of the first bloom. We focused it, channeled it through the prism, offering it directly to him. The concept was staggering. They hadn't just attacked a monster, they'd attempted to offer him an experience, a sensation, a fundamental element of being that he'd clearly lost. As if in response, the cloud of Nyxos shifted, expanding slightly. A tendril of violet light reached out, not to drain, but to gently brush against the quartz shard. The air around the shard shimmered, and for a heartbeat the temple filled with the ghost of a fragrance, the scent of a flower long extinct, a bloom called the lunaris, said to have sprung from moonlight and possessed a color so intense it could briefly blind. "He remembers," Rhys whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He remembers something beautiful. Something lost." Suddenly the ground beneath them trembled. A low, guttural moan, not of pain but of recognition, echoed from the depths of the temple. The violet cloud pulsed violently, and a single shimmering fragment detached itself from the main mass, drifting slowly towards Rhys. It wasn't a predatory attack, it was a hesitant offering. As the fragment approached, Rhys instinctively reached out, his hand not with a weapon but with a gesture of openness. He closed his eyes, focusing on the overwhelming sensation of the memory, the dazzling beauty of the lunaris, the warmth of the sunlight filtering through its petals, the overwhelming feeling of connection it evoked. "It's a shared moment," Rhys murmured, his voice barely audible. "His not just absorbing the memory, has feeling it. Has experiencing it alongside us." Baruch and Elara, initially frozen in stunned silence, reacted quickly. Baruch unleashed a controlled burst of heat, a wave of golden energy that enveloped the fragment, not to destroy it, but to amplify the sensation, to strengthen the connection. Elara, her hands weaving intricate patterns of light, focused the prismatic energy, channeling it through the fragment and into Nyxos' core. As the three converged, a remarkable transformation occurred. The violet cloud began to shift, the bruised indigo fading, replaced by hues of lavender, rose, and finally, a startling radiant gold. The monstrous bloom slowly coalesced, forming a more defined shape, a colossal, wounded heart. Then, a single shimmering tear, a drop of pure, unadulterated light, fell from the heart and landed on the ground. As it touched the dust, a single lunaris flower bloomed, impossibly vibrant against the backdrop of the ravaged temple, a defiant beacon of beauty in the heart of the color-eaten world. "We haven't defeated him," Rhys realized, his voice filled with awe. "We've awakened him." Chapter 11. The Bloom of Recognition. The silence that followed the bloom of the lunaris was thick with disbelief and a nascent understanding. The air, previously brittle with frost and despair, seemed to hum with a strange, low thrumming, a resonance born of Nyxos' reluctant awakening. Rhys, Baruch, and Ilara stood, their faces illuminated by the flower's impossible radiance, a shared vulnerability etched across their features. The weight of their discovery, the sheer audacity of the Bleached Council's betrayal, hadn't lessened, but it had gained a new dimension, layered with a fragile hope. "He's not an agent of destruction," Ilara stated, her voice hushed as a repository. "A collector of lost beauty. And he was starved." Baruch, ever the pragmatist, ran a calloused hand over the cool obsidian of one of the shattered totems. "The council didn't just drain the sunstones, they drained him. They forced him to consume the absence of light, the grief of a world robbed of its color. It's a perverse mimicry of life, feeding on the echoes of what was." Rhys, lost in the memory fragment, nodded slowly. "The connection, it's not a parasitic one. It's desperate. It is trying to remember, to feel the full spectrum, as if it's a missing piece of himself." He glanced at the flower, now radiating a gentle, pulsating warmth. The lunarized wasn't just a beautiful flower. It was a key. The realization settled over them, a delicate but undeniable truth. The war, the senseless slaughter, the frantic scramble for dwindling sunstones, it was all built upon a misunderstanding, a tragic misreading of Nyxos' nature. He wasn't a malevolent force actively seeking to destroy the world. He was a wounded echo, desperately grasping for something head lost. Suddenly, the violet light that still clung to Nyxos' form intensified, swirling violently. The colossal heart pulsed with a chaotic rhythm, and a sound, ancient and mournful, resonated through the ruined temple, the fragmented cries of countless extinguished suns. "He's rejecting us!" Baruch shouted, instinctively raising his hand, preparing a burst of heat. "He is fighting the intrusion!" Ilara countered swiftly, weaving a shield of prismatic energy around the heart, its edges shimmering with a protective aura. "Don't try to force it, Baruch. We need to offer him something that resonates with what is missing." Rhys, his face pale with concentration, focused on the lunaris, extending his own connection, not as a weapon, but as a conduit. He poured into the flower his own memories, the feeling of standing beneath a vibrant sun, the rush of exhilaration as he witnessed a rainbow arc across the sky. He didn't try to overwhelm Nyxos, he simply offered a sliver of his own experience, a small, heartfelt offering of joy. The effect was immediate. The chaotic pulsing of the heart slowed, the violet light diminished, replaced by a hesitant shimmer of lavender. The mournful cries faded, replaced by a low, almost wistful hum. Nyxos, the colossal, wounded heart, seemed to breathe. As responding, Ilara breathed, her hands still directing the prismatic energy. "He's recognizing the sentiment." As they continued to feed him fragments of beauty, Rhys recalling the scent of mountain springs, Bork sharing the warmth of a hearth fire, Ilara projecting the subtle shifts in color of a twilight sky, the transformation became more pronounced. The lavender deepened, revealing streaks of rose and a surprising, nascent gold. The wounded heart began to take on a more defined structure, the jagged edges smoothing into curves, becoming less a grotesque parody of life and more a beautiful, albeit fragile, representation of longing. Then, another tear of light, larger than the first, fell from the heart and landed directly on Rhys' outstretched hand. It wasn't painful, but rather intensely warm, filling him with a feeling of profound peace and an overwhelming sense of connection to everything, to the ravaged world, to the warring nations, to the tortured essence of Nyxos. As the light dissipated, a new bloom sprang forth from the heart, not a single lunaris, but a cluster of them, each one a tiny, perfect replica of the original, radiating a soft golden light. These smaller blooms, they realized, weren't merely reflections of the lunaris, they were fragments of the light itself, actively being drawn from Nyxos' core. "His healing himself," Rhys whispered, his eyes shining with wonder. "His using the fragments to rebuild his own light." But as the last bloom unfurled, a chilling realization dawned on them. Nyxos, now almost completely formed, rose slowly, rising not as a monstrous entity, but as a being of pure shimmering light. His form solidified, taking on the shape of a young man, his eyes reflecting the golden glow of the newly formed blooms. He looked at them, not with malice, but with an exquisite sadness, a profound sense of loss. "You have awakened me," he said, his voice a chorus of countless whispers, "and in doing so, you have made me aware of the price of your war." Chapter 12. The Echo of Sorrow. The silence following Nyxos' final declaration was heavier than the frozen air of the last valley. The Pyre of Nations, a monument built of the remnants of betrayal, charred banners, shattered obsidian, splintered telescopes, seemed to hum with a strange, potent energy. Rhys, Lyra, and Kale, standing shoulder to shoulder amidst the cooling embers, felt the weight of it, a profound sorrow settling upon them like a shroud. "He speaks of a price," Lyra said, her voice barely a breath, the violet sheen still flickering faintly on her skin, a residual echo of the Council's corruption. "A price for our awakening." Kale, his face grim, tightened his grip on the hearth hammer, the warmth radiating from it, a meager comfort against the pervasive chill. The Bleached Council weren't just draining the Sunstones. They were feeding him with the agony of our conflict. Nyxos, now a figure of breathtaking beauty and unsettling sadness, drifted closer, his luminous form shifting slightly with an almost liquid grace. He wasn't menacing, not in the way the initial projections had suggested. He was fragile, like a newly formed star, vulnerable and desperately trying to coalesce. "The war," he continued, his voice still a layered chorus, "was a wound. A festering wound upon the fabric of existence. I, in my slumber, was a conduit for that pain. The Sunstones weren't simply repositories of warmth, they were vessels of hope, of joy, of life. Each stolen drop fueled my growth, amplified the suffering, and drew me ever closer to consuming the world entirely." Rhys, guided by an instinct he couldn't quite articulate, reached out a hand towards Nyxos. The air around the nascent being shimmered, and the golden light emanating from the miniature blooms intensified, bathing the valley in a breathtaking radiance. As his fingers brushed against Nyxos' luminous hand, the feeling of profound connection flooded him, stronger than before. It wasn't just a sense of shared existence, it was an understanding, a shared grief. He saw, in that instant, the endless cycle of suffering Nyxos had been trapped in, the echoes of countless forgotten wars, the desperate grasping for warmth and light in a dying world. "You sought to break me," Nyxos said, his sorrow deepened. "But you didn't destroy me. You remade me." He gestured towards the cluster of lunaris blooms, now pulsating with a vibrant golden light. "These fragments of light, drawn from my core, are not just sustenance. They are an attempt to understand. To understand the beauty you almost extinguished, the potential for connection that I nearly devoured." Suddenly, the ground beneath them vibrated. The heat from the hearthhammer flared, and a jagged fissure opened in the rock, revealing a vein of shimmering violet crystal, the very substance that had pulsed with the council's corruption. The violet light intensified, pulsing with a rhythmic beat that seemed to echo Nyxos' sorrow. "The council," Kale shouted. "They weren't just feeding me. They were anchoring me." The violet crystal was the key, drawing my essence back into the Umbral Plane, keeping me tethered to the cycle of destruction. Rhys, Lyra, and Kale instinctively focused their combined energies. Rhys, channeling the pure, righteous flame of the Torchbearer lineage, directed a wave of golden light towards the fissure. Lyra, her skin glowing with nascent violet healing energy, attempted to neutralize the corrupting influence. Kale, wielding the hearthhammer, unleashed a focused blast of heat, attempting to sever the connection between Nyxos and the crystal. It was a desperate, chaotic dance of light and heat, a fragile attempt to wrestle control from a being of immense power. But as they concentrated, they realized something unsettling. Nyxos wasn't resisting. He was cooperating all. The violet crystal glowed brighter, then dimmed as Rhys' golden flame consumed it. As the last traces of violet vanished, the fissure sealed itself, and the rhythmic pulsing of the valley seemed to slow, to breathe. "Edo," Imra whispered, exhaustion etched on her face. "The tetherit's broken." Nyxos turned his luminous gaze upon them, his expression now filled with a burgeoning sense of gratitude. "You have given me a choice," he said, his voice softening, "a chance to fulfill the purpose for which I was created. Not to consume, but to preserve." He raised a hand, and a single Lunoris, larger than the others, detached itself from the cluster and drifted towards Rhys. As the light touched his outstretched hand, it wasn't a searing warmth, but a gentle, comforting embrace. A single image flashed through Rhys' mind, a vision of the earth before the Bleached Council, a vibrant tapestry of color and life, a testament to the potential that lay dormant within the world. "The light," Nyxos said, "is not just for survival. It is for creation." Chapter 13. The loom of echoes. The air in the last valley hung thick with the scent of ozone and something subtly sweeter, a fragrance Rhys hadn't encountered since childhood, a phantom memory of wildflowers blooming under a truly blue sky. The violet glow of the sunstones, now inert and dull, had vanished, replaced by a gentle, pulsating luminescence emanating from the collective pile they'd created, the Pyre of Nations. It wasn't the aggressive heat of a dying sun, but a soft, insistent warmth, like holding a newborn. The silence, broken only by the crackling of residual heat and the murmured prayers of the assembled armies, was profound. Kale, sweat plastering his dark hair to his forehead, leaned heavily on his hearthhammer, the runes etched into its head still faintly shimmering. Lyra, her usually sharp elven eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension, meticulously examined a lunaris, a sunstone the size of her forearm, holding it aloft to catch the shifting light. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. Not a cold, desperate light, but a light brimming with potential. Nyxos, no longer a terrifying shifting mass, existed now as a shimmering, iridescent orb, suspended just above the pyre. He radiated not malice, but an almost heartbreaking melancholy. He was, as Head stated, fulfilling his purpose, a custodian of fading light, a living echo of a forgotten grandeur. The Bleached Council's actions were born of fear. Nyxos' voice resonated, less a spoken word and more a feeling that settled into their minds. Fear of the past, fear of the future, fear of anything brighter than their own limited vision. They sought to control the light, to hoard it, believing they could understand it. They were tragically, fatally wrong. The human, orc, and elven contingents remained a tense, watchful presence. Archbishop Morian, stripped of his robes and bound by the woven banners, a defiant tapestry of holy symbols, sat slumped against a moss-covered boulder, his face a mask of bewildered pain. He hadn't experienced a physical wound, but a profound violation, a shattering of his own understanding of reality. The council believed they were securing their nation's futures, growled Burrock Stonefist, Hearthguard captain of the Jagged-Blade Orcs, his hand resting heavily on the haft of his warhammer. They saw the Sunstones as weapons, as tools for dominance. They were fools. And they were poisoned, added Ilara Swiftwind, prism mage of the Void-Walker Elves, her eyes scanning the assembled warriors. The whispers of Nyxos, amplified by their ambition and greed, clouded their judgment. They built their own cage, and nearly destroyed us all. Rhys, holding the Lunaris close, felt a surge of connection to the ancient being. He saw flashes, not just of the vibrant past, but of the delicate, intricate web of magic that had once interwoven with the world, a web now frayed and damaged. He realized with a chilling clarity that Nyxos wasn't merely a leech, he was a rememberer, a repository of lost knowledge, a link to a world that existed beyond the confines of mortal understanding. The Bleached Council weren't merely draining the stones, Nyxos continued, his voice laced with a somber urgency. They were draining time. The stones held not just warmth, but echoes of moments of creation, of destruction, of hope and despair. Each stolen shard accelerated the decay, shortening the lifespan of this valley, of this world. Suddenly the ground beneath them began to vibrate. A low, resonant hum filled the air, growing in intensity until it threatened to shatter their eardrums. From the heart of the pyre, a column of iridescent light erupted, spiraling upwards with impossible speed. It wasn't the chaotic, destructive force of a dying sun, but a carefully focused beam, a meticulously crafted thread of light. "He's weaving," Lyra exclaimed, recognizing the intricate pattern. "He's attempting to mend the rifts, to re-establish the flow of time." As the light reached its apex, it coalesced into a shimmering tapestry, depicting scenes from the world's history, the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth of magic, the moments of both profound beauty and unimaginable horror. It wasn't a simple record, but a loom of echoes, a living representation of time itself. But as the tapestry solidified, a new darkness began to spread, not a violent void, but a subtle, insidious dampening of color. The pyre of nations seemed to shrink, the warmth diminishing. Nyxos' luminescence faded slightly, a flicker of sorrow crossing his iridescent form. "The energy drain, it's not gone," he said, his voice strained. "It's simply distributed. The wounds created by the Council are deeper than we realize. To fully restore this world, it will require a sacrifice." He looked directly at Rhys, his gaze piercing. "You, Torchbearer, possess the strongest flame. You will be the catalyst for the final reweaving." Chapter 14. The looms lament the air, hung thick with the scent of ozone and a strange metallic tang, the residue of the pyre's chaotic birth. The shimmering tapestry, now a vast, three-dimensional panorama dominating the last valley, pulsed with a muted, almost mournful light. The initial awe had begun to fray, replaced by a chilling understanding. Nyxos wasn't merely being defeated, he was being repaired, and the cost was terrifyingly clear. Rhys, the human torchbearer, felt a tremor run through him, not of heat, but of something far colder, a bone-deep sorrow that resonated with the tapestry's somber hues. The scenes unfolding before him were less records of triumph and more echoes of regret. He witnessed the forging of the first sunstones, young elven hands struggling with raw magic, a human king's arrogant ambition leading to a devastating famine, an Orcish warband sacrificing their own for a stolen shard each moment, a shard of a broken world, painstakingly reconstructed. It's feeding on our memories, Lyra," the elven prism mage whispered, her face etched with horror. Her hand trembled as she adjusted the remaining shards of her shattered telescope. The prismatic beam, now a faint, wavering thread aimed at the tapestry. The echoes errant just witnessing their absorbing our emotional resonance, our pain, our regrets. It's creating a feedback loop. Across the pyre, Kaelin, the Orcish Hearthguard, shifted uneasily. The heat radiating from the remaining embers of the pyre was noticeably weaker, a physical manifestation of the loss of power. The Blood-Shaman was right, he rumbled, his voice a low growl. The council didn't just steal from the stones. They stole from the very heart of this world, from its memory. Nyxos' form, now a shifting mass of indigo luminescence, drifted closer. His voice, a chorus of whispers and static, was imbued with a profound weariness. The council's actions weren't born of malice. Torchbearer, he said, the words laced with a heartbreaking irony. They were born of fear. Fear of oblivion, fear of the inevitable fading. They sought to cling to existence, but clung too tightly, unraveling the threads of time itself. He turned his attention back to Rhys, his iridescent gaze intensified, pinning him with an unnerving focus. The tapestry, it's a conduit. A vessel for the raw, untamed energy of time. To fully reweave it, to mend the rifts, a surge of pure, unadulterated emotion is required. A sacrifice, yes, but not of life. A sacrifice of self. The implication slammed into Rhys with the force of a physical blow. He understood. He was to become a node, a focal point for the tapestry's desperate plea, channeling his own burning passion, his own desperate hope, into the very fabric of existence. "What must I do?" Rhys asked, his voice strained. "You must offer yourself as a vessel for the living flame," Nyxos explained. A subtle shift in his form indicating a deepening understanding of Rhys' abilities. Not extinguish it, but amplify it. Let your flame become the warp and weft of this new creation. You will become the anchor, holding the threads of time together while I, and the echoes of the past, weave them anew. Suddenly a wave of disorientation washed over Rhys. The tapestry pulsed brighter, bathing him in an intense, almost unbearable light. He felt his own memories, his hopes, his fears, being drawn out, sifted through, and then rewoven into the fabric of the tapestry. He saw himself as a child, rescuing a wounded wolf, felt the crushing weight of his father's death, relived the agonizing moment when he first ignited his torch, understanding the boundless potential of his flame. Lyra gasped, extending a hand towards him. It's overwhelming. The tapestry is absorbing your entire being." Kaelin moved swiftly, laying a hand on Rhys' shoulder, grounding him with a rough, reassuring touch. "Focus, Torchbearer. Remember why you fight. Remember the warmth you strive to restore. Let the flame guide you. Don't be consumed by it." Rhys closed his eyes, drawing on every ounce of strength, every flicker of conviction within him. He visualized the warmth of the sun, the vibrant hues of a healed world, the hope of a shared dawn. He poured himself into the living tapestry, feeling the threads of time surge through his veins, intertwining with his very essence. As he did, the pyre began to glow with a renewed intensity, the heat rising in visible waves. The tapestry shimmered, the mournful light intensifying, as new scenes began to appear, brighter and more vibrant than before. But the dampening darkness lingered, a subtle, insidious shadow creeping around the edges of the newly formed reality. Nyxos' luminescence pulsed with increasing urgency, a desperate plea hanging in the air. The weave is unraveling. More sacrifices needed. Chapter 15. The loom of loss. The air in the last valley hung thick with the scent of ozone and burnt bone. The pyre of nations burned with a furious, chaotic beauty, a vortex of orange, crimson, and gold spitting sparks into the bruised twilight. Rhys, still reeling from the torrent of memories, stood at the heart of it, his torch held aloft like a defiant banner. The raw, untamed heat of his flame, mingled with the strange, resonant warmth radiating from the colossal pile of shattered sunstones, now pulsing with a nascent, hopeful light. Lyra, her face streaked with soot and a nascent tremor of exhaustion, worked tirelessly alongside him, manipulating the remaining shards of the shattered telescopes. With deft movements, she focused the prismatic light, directing it into a razor-sharp beam that danced across the swirling chaos of the pyre. It's fighting back," she gasped, sweat plastering her dark hair to her forehead. "The Council's influence lingers, Racers. The tapestry resists, attempting to pull us back into the despair." Kalen, the Hearthguard, was a bulwark of grim determination. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his massive frame reinforcing the base of the pyre, ensuring the carefully constructed structure didn't succumb to the volatile energy. "The stone resonates with grief, with the echoes of their betrayal," he rumbled, his voice a low, steady counterpoint to the roaring flames. "We must feed it not just hope, but acceptance, the acknowledgement of what was lost." Suddenly, the tapestry pulsed violently. The mournful light intensified, shifting from a melancholic gray to a sickly, bruised purple. The new scenes appearing within the woven reality, the fiery birth of Rhys Flame, the death of his father, bled into each other with frantic urgency. And then, a new thread emerged, a terrifying image of Kalen's grandmother, a renowned healer, lying dying in a snow-swept field. Her last breath a whisper of forgotten herbs. "No!" Rhys shouted, his voice raw with anguish. He instinctively reached out, attempting to pull Kalen from the scene, but it was a futile gesture. The tapestry had seized him, dragging him back to that horrific moment, forcing him to relive the helpless terror of witnessing her demise. He saw, through her dying eyes, the bleak, color-drained world, a mirror to the reality they were struggling to reclaim. Lyra, recognizing the danger, unleashed a concentrated blast of prismatic light at the encroaching shadow. The purple light recoiled, momentarily disrupted, but the tapestry immediately responded, weaving in the spectral image of the Archbishop's cold, calculating face, the Blood-Shaman's twisted grin, and the Star-Seer's vacant stare. "It's feeding on our sorrow," she cried. "Nyxos, he's using our memories against us. Has amplified our grief to fuel his own existence." The urgency in her voice spiked Rhys' senses. He realized with a chilling clarity that the tapestry wasn't simply recording their memories. It was harvesting them, twisting them, using them to reinforce the Bleached Council's insidious control. The dampening darkness wasn't just a symptom. It was the very mechanism of Nyxos manipulation. Just as Rhys began to succumb to the overwhelming tide of despair, a new, unexpected surge of warmth washed over him. He glanced down to see Kalen carefully placing a small polished obsidian stone into the heart of the pyre. It wasn't a sunstone, but a relic of the Jagged-Blade Orcs, a shard from the ancestral forge where they'd once crafted weapons of unmatched power. "The forge," Kalen said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "the heart of our people. It remembers strength, resilience, and the refusal to yield. This stone, it doesn't offer warmth, but it offers defiance." As the obsidian stone settled into the pile, the tapestry shimmered again, and the scene of his father's death shifted. Instead of the bleak, lifeless field, Rhys saw his father standing tall, his torch burning bright, a defiant grin on his face as he charged into the approaching darkness. He wasn't just a grieving son, he was a warrior, a symbol of unwavering hope. "It's correcting itself," Rhys exclaimed, feeling a surge of renewed determination. "We're not just fighting for the light, we're fighting for the spirit within it." But as he spoke, the tapestry intensified its assault. The mournful light reached a fever pitch, and a new, horrifying image materialized, a colossal silhouette rising above the last valley Nyxos. Not a raging, chaotic cloud, but a precise, terrifyingly beautiful entity, a gargantuan, ink-stained hand reaching down to grasp the heart of the pyre. As aware of us. Lyra screamed, her voice laced with terror. He's trying to break us. Reese raised his torch higher, its flames licking at the encroaching shadow. Then well burn brighter, he roared, his voice echoing across the valley, a defiant cry against the encroaching darkness. For the Color-Eater's end!